What's up, guys? We are back with another educational video, and this week we are talking about vegan proteins. Now, I know some of you guys out there who are vegans, you might feel like I pick on you sometimes, and I'm not. I'm really not. I just like to talk about the ones who make a little bit crazy claims in terms of some of the health benefits of veganism. But as you guys know, if somebody's a vegan for ethical reasons, got zero problem with it. In fact, I do have a certain level of admiration for that. And again, got no problems with it. So I do get asked a lot, hey Lane, what are the best sources for vegan proteins? Now, when you're dealing with vegan proteins, there's a few things to consider. In fact, my PhD looked at this a little bit because we compared vegan sources of protein like wheat and soy to sources like egg and whey, and we found that generally, egg and whey were better for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. Now, there's a few things to unpack with why animal protein sources are a little bit better for anabolism compared to vegan sources. And then we're going to talk about what the best vegan sources are in terms of trying to maximize anabolism if you're looking to build muscle. So the first thing is most vegan proteins have a lower digestibility score. So they're more difficult to digest, especially when you're dealing with the intact vegetable or source of protein. So if you're dealing with there's a difference between soy from soybeans and soy isolate, difference between pea and pea protein isolate, difference between rice and rice protein, and there's a difference between, say, oats and protein isolate from oats. So the whole vegan source of protein is actually less digestible. And part of that is because of the insoluble fiber and the structure of the vegan source, in that it can bind up the protein and make it inaccessible to digestive enzymes. One of the health benefits of vegetables is that they do have insoluble fiber. The fiber in vegetables and non-animal sources of protein is actually a good thing, in that there are health benefits associated with soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. But when it comes to getting the protein out of those sources, it's not so good because it can bind it up and make it inaccessible to digestive enzymes. So if you're gonna get a large amount of protein or try to get a large amount of protein as a vegan, you're probably gonna need to supplement with some sort of protein isolate. Insofar as if you're somebody who's concerned about building muscle. If you're not worried about building muscle, then hey, eat what you want. So there's the digestibility issue. There's also an issue of the amino acid composition of these proteins. So when we look at non-essential amino acids versus essential amino acids, in general, the essential amino acids are much lower in vegan sources of protein versus animal sources of protein. And then we look at specifically like the branched chain amino acids like leucine, which is responsible for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. In fact, this is what my research specifically looked at. Vegan sources tend to be lower in leucine as well, meaning you're not getting that robust anabolic response. Now, we did show that if you got vegan sources of protein high enough and that your total leucine was high enough, you could replicate the effect that you get with animal sources, but it just takes more because one, there's less essential amino acids and less leucine, and two, it tends to be less digestible. Now, with that being said, I'm going to talk about isolated sources of protein. So when I say something like soy, I'm not talking about soybeans. I'm talking about soy protein isolate. When I say something like pea, I'm not talking about eating peas. I'm talking about pea isolate. And the reason is most of these protein sources, the concentration of protein is pretty darn low. So even things like beans, in a serving of beans, you get 8 grams of protein. But when you consider that like 40% of it is not even bioavailable, it's pretty low amount. So again, if building muscle is a concern and athletic performance is a concern, you're probably going to want to supplement. Now, I know, drum roll please, the moment you've all been waiting for. What are the best sources of vegan proteins? Well, there's a few things to consider. Most vegan proteins are limiting in different amino acids. And so you can do what's called combining different sources of vegan proteins. But there is one vegan protein out there that actually has a very high amount of essential amino acids, and that's potato protein isolate. Now, it's a little bit difficult to find. It's not as popular, but it actually has a PD-COS of 0.93. Now, a PD-COS stands for Protein Digestibility Amino Acid Score. It's kind of a measure of how good is this protein in terms of essential amino acids, how well distributed is it, does it have any limiting amino acids, plus how digestible is it. So a 1 is the best value you can get. A 0.93 is pretty good. In fact, that's on par with several animal sources of protein. I think beef is a 0.95 or something like that. So it's right there in the ballpark. And it's got about 10% leucine, which is great. Whey protein has 11%, eggs have 9%. So again, it's right there in that ballpark. Now the one downside is it's not limiting in threonine, but it's a little bit on the low side in threonine. But you could combine that with another plant protein source and help make up that threonine. Now there's still other pretty good sources of plant proteins. Something like corn. Corn has more essential amino acids than most of the other vegan sources of protein, except for potato protein isolate. And it's actually really high in leucine. It's up to 12% leucine, which is great. But corn is very low in lysine. And it's kind of like that with wheat as well. Wheat is low in lysine, but it's also low in leucine. I wouldn't recommend wheat. So what can we combine a corn protein with that's higher in lysine to help make up for that lack of lysine in the corn protein? Well, you can combine it with actually soy or pea protein. Both of those proteins are pretty high in lysine, but they're low in methionine and cysteine, the sulfur amino acids. But fortunately, corn is pretty high in the sulfur amino acids, so if you combine them together, you're good to go. So there's some other sources of protein that are still pretty good, but they're a little bit low in lysine, and those would be spirulina, rice, and hemp. Hemp tends to be a little bit lower digestibility, so it's not something I really recommend that much. But you could combine any of those with soy or pea, and you would have a pretty complete protein. So those are good options. The other option you could do is combine any of these with the potato protein isolate, and you would pretty much be getting what you need. So actually, what I might recommend would be something like a potato and a corn, because now you've got the highest leucine source, which is corn, paired with a protein that is also really high in essential amino acids, and you're basically covering all your bases. So it's probably still not quite as good as animal protein, and the reason being there was a recent study that looked at basically taking vegan proteins that were the same digestibility and mixing them together so they had the same essential amino acid content versus whey. And they found that even when they did that, they didn't get as high of blood levels of amino acids with the plant proteins as they did the whey proteins. And their suggestion for this was that the liver was sequestering some of these amino acids. Now, they didn't measure that, so they can't say it for sure. And again, this is a surrogate measure. It's not actually measuring anabolism. It's just looking at how many amino acids are getting to the bloodstream. But it is something to consider. So I still wouldn't say that it's necessarily as good as animal protein, but you're getting pretty darn close. And if you're using something like a potato protein isolate, I mean, if you can only pick one, that's probably my pick. Again, another good one is corn if you combine it with pea or soy, and then they kind of fall off a little bit after that. But you've certainly got options, and you can do a vegan diet, get enough protein, and still grow plenty of muscle. It's just going to take a little bit more planning and a little bit more research on your part. All right, guys, if you like this video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out some of my educational ebooks, as well as my nutrition coaching app, Carbon Diet Coach. Hope you guys are enjoying these videos, and I will catch you next week.